Well, hey there, traveler, and welcome back to the GameDev Tavern. Come warm yourself by the fire and create games with us. My name is Nicholas, and this is episode 7 of the tutorial series where we create a pixel art beat-em-up game in Godot. Alright, so today we're going to have the enemies allowed to hit the player, and just to make sure that things are not too complicated, we'll just skip one of those enemies. So let's go ahead and remove 4 out of those enemies from the main world scene. Press save. Next thing we'll do is just make sure we'll clear all of these errors in the debugger. So let's hop over here. Wall is not used, so let's just put an underscore here. Next one, damage here is shadowing, so let's just set this as amount. And finally, hit type here is not used, so we can also have an underscore. Okay, let's make sure we cleared all the warnings. Okay, and we have our enemy here. All right, so we already have a lot of the logic for hitting and receiving damage, but we are missing a couple of animations. So let's go ahead and set those up, and then we can include the logic for the enemies. First, we'll need to have the player hopping over into the animation player. We are going to create a new animation. Let's call this hurt. This animation is going to be 3 frames long. So we'll mark this as 0.3 and have a snap of 0.1. And I believe that the animation starts at frame 70. So go ahead and select your character sprite, go to frame 70 and add 3 keyframes. 1, 2, 3. We want to go back to the idle state. So call back on the player, and here right click, insert key, and we'll hop over to the on action complete. Okay, next we'll need an animation for falling. So let's go ahead and create a new animation. Let's call it fall. This is a single frame animation. We'll make this 0.1. It does loop. Go ahead and select frame 80. Insert a keyframe. Lastly, we'll want an animation for when the player is on the ground. So go ahead and hit new. Animation name is grounded, frame 82. Okay, insert a keyframe. Okay, let's go ahead and save. Now hop over into the enemy, basic enemies animation. And here we're going to have animations for punching. I believe there's 2 punch animations, so we'll just insert both of those. New punch. This is an animation that takes 2 frames, so we'll make this 0.2. And hop over into the first frame, select the character sprite, and I believe that this starts on frame 21. So insert those 2 keyframes. Oh, let's set the snap to 0.1, make sure to realign things properly. Okay, and at the end of the punch, we want to add a callback towards the enemy scene. Right click, insert key, on action complete. Okay, and last thing we'll want to do is enable the damage emitter. So let's hop over at the beginning of the animation, select damage animator and make it monitoring. And at the end of the animation, we'll remove this. Okay, let's go into a different animation, new, punch, alternative. This is also a 2 frame animation. Set the length to 0.2, set the character sprite starting at frame 31. Let's insert those 2 frames. At the end, we'll want to add a callback to the enemy, right click, insert key, on action complete. Similarly, let's go to the beginning and enable the damage emitter. We'll make it monitoring. And at the end, we'll remove this. And we now should have all the animations set up to have the enemies start hitting. We'll also have a new state where the enemies will be prepared to hit. And during that state, they'll stay static and wait for the timer to expire before they actually throw their punch in. Back into the enemy script. We're going to add a couple of new properties. First one is going to be the time between hits. This is going to be an integer, the number of seconds. And then we'll have a different variable for how long they wait between getting ready to hit and actually throwing the punch. Duration, prep, hit. Okay, and these are going to be in milliseconds. So between hits, we will set this to 4 seconds. And then preparing hit, we'll just set this to 1 second for now. Okay, we'll want to have 2 timers, and I usually like to just keep those as variables rather than creating timer nodes. It just makes it easier since Godot already has an internal timer and it keeps track of how long has spent since the beginning of the game. The time since the last hit will initiate this, and the time since the preparation for the hit. All right, next we'll check how close we are to the player and whether we can attack the player or not. So here we are close enough to the player. Actually, let me create another function for this. Func is player within range. That way we can fine tune this a little bit. This returns a Boolean. And for now, we're just going to have this piece of logic here. Okay, so if the player is within range, and now we want to check the timer as well. So and can attack. So can attack already exists as part of the main class. We actually are going to be overriding this inside our enemy, and we'll also want to check that the time elapsed is sufficient. So if time.getTicks minus so if we haven't spent enough time, we'll return false. Otherwise, we'll return super.canAttack. If we are close enough, we'll stop the enemy. And if we can attack, then we'll set the state to state.prepattack. So we need a new state here. Let's hop over into the character and go all the way up. And here, we'll have a state just for the enemies to wait until they're ready to attack. So we'll hop over into that state. So let's hop over into the character scene, and where we are handling all of our states, we'll handle a new state. And this by default will be an empty function, so we won't need to override it on the player side. But we'll be handling it on the enemy side. Here what we want to do is just check whether the time has sufficiently elapsed for us to be able to start throwing a punch. So let's make sure we kickstart the timer here. Let's check that we are in the right state. If we have been preparing for an attack and we've passed that 1 second that we configured, then we're going to throw the punch. In the attack state, we currently are going through several animations for the player. And if you remember in the character scene all the way to the top, we identified various animations of attack. The enemies won't actually be supporting all of this. So rather than have a definition of all of these attack as part of the character scene, we'll just keep this as an empty array. And within the ready function, we'll go ahead and add a custom code for the enemy and the player. Okay, this is for the player, and inside the enemy we'll do the same thing, except here we only have a punch and a punch alternate. All right, so when we attack, we want to pick one of those two animations. So we are going to just shuffle this array, and we'll pick the first one. And lastly, because we had a new state, we'll want to have an animation for the preparing attack. Hop over back into the character, scroll all the way to the top, and here we are going to insert a new key in our dictionary. And we'll actually reuse the idle animation for this. I wish we had a different frame for showing the player that they're about to get attacked. Maybe we can fine tune that and, as we polish the game. Hop over into the enemy. Here we'll want to indicate the time since last hit. And we'll set this to right now, 6 milliseconds. And lastly, if you hop over back into the world scene, because we had already instantiated this enemy, by default, it's going to override the values for the new properties that we created. Let's just reset those so that way we have the default values. Press F5. Okay, and then you see the enemy go towards the player, wait 4 seconds, and wait 1 second where they stay static, and then they throw the punch. 4 seconds is probably too much. We can reduce this, and then let's make sure that the enemy does make contact. So let's reduce this to 2 seconds, and we'll reduce this to half a second. Let's go ahead and enable the collision shape in the debug phase and press F5. All right, so we'll probably want to make the hit zone for the player a little bit bigger. So hop over into the player scene and let's pick the damage receiver collision shape and zoom in a little bit, and we are going to make this 10 by 10. All right, so here the player is getting hit properly. So I have set the collision shape to be 10 by 10 with a transform of 0 minus 15. And we'll see if the player can actually die properly. So let's set the damage of the enemies. Let's go into the world, and we'll set the damage of this guy to 50. All right, you can see the enemy has hit the player down, knocked him down. I didn't quite see the falling animation, so I think this is because the player currently doesn't have any knockdown intensity. So we can hop over back into the player and knockdown intensity. Let's make this 10 and 70 as well. Let's try again. There we go. Okay, the enemies now have the ability to hit and knock down the player. We'll go ahead and remove the visible collision shapes. And let's go ahead and set the damage back to 2. Let's talk a bit about how we're going to implement weapons. So we will have 2 types of weapons in the game, a knife and a gun. But from a game design perspective, these 2 will actually share a lot of similarities. So we'll just focus on the knife weapon for now. So weapons will appear in 3 form factors in the game. The first form factor is as an additional sprite on the player and enemy characters. If you look closely at the sprite sheet, you'll see that the art was created in a way that the character sprite sheets and the weapon sprite sheets align perfectly. By having one on top of the other, we can reuse all of the same animations. So all we'll need to do is toggle the visibility of the weapon sprite depending on whether the character is holding a weapon or not. The second form factor is as a pickable prop on the ground, and these will spawn from 2 sources. Some destructible barrels will contain weapons, and then any other character that is holding a weapon who receives damage will drop that weapon to the ground. When those scenes are spawned on demand, they will first rotate as they fall to the ground, and then remain there until they are picked up by a character. At which point, we'll just destroy the object from the main scene and have the character display the weapon sprite as the carried form. The third form factor is as a flying object in the world scene. So these flying weapons will be spawned whenever they're thrown by enemies or by the player. And they will cause damage to players and enemies alike, and they'll be destroyed upon contact. In the event where they don't hit anything while flying, they will also detect going out of the camera view and self-destroy as well. Because the second form and third form factors are different instantiations of the same weapon game object scene, we'll actually have 2 different state machines depending on which form factor we are creating. In the pickable form, the initial state will be falling to the ground before it transitions to its idle state. But in the flying form, the object will remain in its state until the object is destroyed. So we'll divide the work in 3 parts. First, we will create the weapon as a carried object using this sprite, and then as a pickable object that falls to the ground, and finally as a thrown object. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and start adding the knife sprite. We will hop over into the character, since both the player and the enemies will be able to hold a knife. And let's go ahead and add a sprite. but we won't be setting the texture. Let's call this knife sprite. We won't be setting the texture because the texture is going to be different depending on whether it's the player sprite sheet or the basic enemy sprite sheet. So let's hop over into the player and click on the knife sprite, and then hop over into your assets folder, art, characters, and locate the player knife. Drag that image all the way to the texture. This is again a 10 by 10 image. So if you were to zoom out, you would see the images here. Let's zoom back in, and we're going to set the animation as a 10 by 10 frame sprite sheet. Let's keep it on frame 0, but we don't want to keep the offset, and we'll have the same offset here, -24, -48. So you can see the image aligns perfectly here. And now we'll add the knife to every single animation. And you'll see that we don't have frames with the knife on every single animation, but we want to make sure that on some of those animations, the knife actually clears. So for example, when the player falls down, we don't want to keep the knife on a frame that's outdated. So we'll go through the exercise of going through every single animation one by one and just setting the exact same frame that has been set on the player. So for example, the fall is frame 80. We're just going to add the knife sprite on frame 80. And add a keyframe here. So I'm going to accelerate through this portion, but this is something you'll need to do on your end as well. So this is 82, hop over to the knife sprite, select frame 82 and create a keyframe. So do this for every single animation. All right, and when you have completed, you can go ahead and play every single animation. Make sure that they all make sense. So some of those animations don't have a knife on purpose because they just don't need it. However, we want to make sure that the frames are set correctly in case we wanted to add a knife later down the road on the animations. We'll have to do the same thing on the enemy side of things. So let's hop over into the enemy. And in a knife sprite, we'll drag and drop the enemy knife image into the texture. Let's make sure that we are setting this as a 10 by 10 animation. Let's keep it on frame 0, and on the offset, let's set this to -24, -48. And then repeat the exact same exercise that we did with the player. Just hop over into the animation player and start setting every single animation using the same keyframe. So here we'll have the keyframe 51, hop over to the knife sprite, pick up frame 51 and create a keyframe. Okay, and repeat this for every single animation. Okay, once we're done, we're going to surface a new property that we can edit in the editor to indicate whether the character has the knife. Let's hop over into the character script. And here let's add a new property at the top that we're going to export called has knife. This is going to be a Boolean. And the next thing that we'll need to do whenever we draw the character is to hide or show the knife sprite. So we'll need a reference to this node. Let's hop back over into the onReady. And in the process function here, we'll just go ahead and hide it if we do not have a knife. So knife sprite dot we'll need to also set the knife position to follow the player when we're jumping. And we'll also need to flip it as well. Okay, and with that done, if we hop back into the world, by default, our player does not have the knife, but when we turn it on, we should be able to see it in the game. We now have the player who can move and jump with the knife, And we don't have a way to throw the knife yet, so when we do attack, we'll go back to the default attack animations. So the knife disappears. You might have noticed a little bug there that when we got attacked while we were jumping, we actually stayed up in the air. Let me see if I can reproduce this. There we go. And this is simply because we currently are interrupted in our flow and we don't transition back properly into the landing state. Let's hop over into the script, and what we'll do is simply prevent the player or the character from being hurt when they are jumping. So let's hop over and find the can't get hurt method, and we'll just remove the jump from this allow list. Let's go ahead and try this again. Oops. Okay. And now we cannot get hurt when we're jumping. And again, this is a way that that's something that we want to keep, because we want to allow the jumping mechanic to serve as an evasion technique. So the last remaining thing to complete this form factor is to introduce the ability to throw the weapon. And so this again is going to be a new state. So as usual, we're going to hop over, introduce a new state in our enumeration. We'll call this throw. And we're going to have an animation we're going to create. We'll call that animation throw. So let's add it ahead of time in our animation dictionary. And because this is going to be a single frame animation, we're going to need a callback function. But this time we don't want to just go back to the idle state. We actually want to indicate that we've lost the knife. And so we'll change the has knife property to false. So let's create another callback function similar to the on action complete. And here we'll not just set the state to idle, but we'll also indicate that we don't have a knife anymore. Okay, so we now have a callback function that we can call. Let's hop over into our 2D view, go into the player, and let's go ahead and create this new animation. Animation new, throw. This is going to be a single frame, so let's make it 0.1 with a snap of 0.1. And let's locate, as part of the character sprite, the frame, I believe it's 31. Add a keyframe, and then back into the first animation frame, hop over into the knife sprite, and we want to also pick frame 31. Okay, and at the end of this animation, we'll be adding a callback to the method that we just created. Right-click, insert key, on throw complete. Okay, we'll want to do the exact same thing on the enemy side. So let's hop over to the basic enemy scene. Go into the animation player, new, throw. It's going to be a single frame animation. And let's hop over into the character sprite, pick frame 31, add a keyframe, go back to the first frame and add the same thing for the knife sprite. And at the end of the animation, let's add a callback method towards the basic enemy, right click, insert key, and on throw complete. Okay, lastly, we need to be able to transition into the throw state. And for this, we'll insert the logic of the enemy a little bit later. It's a little bit more complicated, but we can already start doing that for the player character. So let's hop over into the player script. And whenever we are handling the input here, when we can attack and we've pressed the attack key, let's just check if we have a knife in hand. In which case we'll hop over into the throw state. Otherwise, we'll just have a regular attack. Okay, so with that done, I believe we should be able to try this out. So F5. Okay, so our player has the knife and we're going to try to throw it away. And there we go. And now the player can attack properly. Okay, this is great. So there are a couple of things that we'll want to add. First, we'll want to drop the knife when we get hit and we have the knife, so we can implement that right away. And then we'll start implementing the logic for the enemies when they do have a knife. And of course, they'll be very courageous. They'll stay away as far as possible from the player and just throw knives from the distance. So let's hop over into the character script. And when we do receive damage, we'll want to drop the knife here. Okay, and so let's try to get hit and see if we are indeed dropping the knife. There we go. So we'll probably actually create a knife scene and properly drop it And we'll have different behaviors when we are hitting an enemy that has a knife. It'll drop to the ground, but allow the player to pick it up. But when the player drops a knife that he had picked up and drops it, we'll make it disappear and remove it from the game. That way, it will add some fun gameplay elements. We can only do that once we have created the knife scene, which we will be doing in the next episode. Right now, I do want to focus for the next couple of minutes on the enemy behavior. When the enemy has a knife, we'll want the enemy to steer clear of the player and just throw those knives at the player. So we can already do a bunch of that logic, at least until the knife needs to appear in the game scene. So our enemy currently in the main game scene does not have a knife, but we're going to provide a special power to enemies. We're going to give them the ability to respawn knives so that they can just stay away from the player and then just respawn knives and just throw them as much as possible. So we're going to make this as part of the character scene. So let's hop back to the top and we're going to need to add a couple of new properties. We'll add a possibility of respawning knives to be true or false. And we'll need to have a duration to know how long we'll wait before we respawn a new knife. So this will be an integer, the number of milliseconds that have elapsed since the beginning of the game. And with every single timer, we'll need to keep track of the time. So let's hop over into our variables and time since knife. So we can both drop it if we get hit, or we can throw it away. So maybe we'll just dismiss. Okay. And so we'll want to have a new handler. And in this handler, we'll just want to check if the character has the ability to respawn knives, if that character does not have a knife, and if the time elapsed has been sufficient, and then we'll just respawn a knife. So a couple of three conditions: if can respawn knives and does not currently have a knife, and the duration, so the current time minus the time when it was either thrown or lost is greater than the duration between respawn, in which case we'll go ahead and provide another knife has knife equals true. So we always want to set this every time the character either throws the knife or loses it as a result of being hit. So if you remember, we just made some tweaks to the handling the receiving damage. And here, if we had a knife and we lost the knife, we just want to keep track of that time. Okay, so back into the world scene. Let's hop into the 2D view. So our enemy here does not have a knife by default, and we'll keep it that way just for testing purposes, but we'll have the power to respawn knives, and we will set the duration to 2 seconds. So 2000. Okay, and after 2 seconds, they have a knife. I'm gonna hit them so they can lose the knife. And after 2 seconds, the knife is respawned once again. Okay, we still have them throw the knife, and this is the next thing that we want to do. Right now, they're just emitting standard punches. So the last remaining thing is to place the enemy characters in a strategic position. And for this, we will be introducing a new node as part of our character scene, which is a raycast 2D. And this will allow us to know if there is the character in the current path of the projectiles. So let's hop over into the character scene, to the 2D view, and Control A to add a new node, and we will have a raycast 2D. We will remove the collision mask, and let's also set the target position to 100, 0. Let's rename this projectile aim. And let's make sure that we rotate it when we are facing the other direction. So we'll need a reference to it. Let's hop back over into the onReady variable. So this is a raycast 2D. And when we're flipping the sprites, let's go ahead and flip this as well. Otherwise, we'll set the scale to -1. Okay, so next, let's hop over into the enemy scene. And here we'll want to check for the player's body. Let's hop over into the script. So here we need to do a little bit of house cleaning, because right now all of the times that we have are targeting melee attacks and all the code is targeting melee attacks. So first of all, let's go ahead and differentiate between the melee attacks and the range attacks. Between hit is a little bit ambiguous. We're going to rename this to between melee attacks and prep melee attacks. Okay, since last melee attack and prep melee attack. Okay, and we'll have additional durations for the range attacks. And we'll also set 2 timers for the range attacks as well. Okay, let's fix the errors. So this is for the melee attack. Same thing here. And I found usually that having good names in your code makes a huge difference in understanding your code. It usually means that you don't need to have comments at all. You can just read through the code and it just makes sense. Okay, I think we're okay here from a naming perspective and from a variable perspective. So all of this code here was written for melee attacks, so maybe we'll just create a new function here. And we'll call this go to melee position. Let's go ahead and cut this and bring it here. And the main difference, so let's also create a go to range position. We'll just pass for now. So if the player has a knife, actually we don't need a knife. We need to be able to respawn the knives. That way the character will always stay clear of the enemy if they have knives in their pockets. So if can respawn knives, then go to the range position. Otherwise, go head-to-head melee with the player. All right, so here we want to look at this code here. So here we want to go at the same Y position as the player. And when we do that, our Raycast 2D will detect the player. And this is a way for us to know that the character can throw the weapon. We want to stay towards the edge of the screen, and there's multiple ways to do this. Actually, we did this once already. If you think about when the player gets ejected to the edge of the screen, we do detect the edge, and then we transition the enemy to the fallen state. So we could do this as well and reuse the same collateral damage area here. But I wanted to maybe use this opportunity to show you a different way to do it, because usually in your games you'll have to deal with the camera quite a bit and what you can see on the screen. And this is a typical use case where you don't necessarily need to create areas and deal with all of this. You actually have access to all of the camera information, the screen information, and you can actually do a little bit of math to capture the right behavior. So let's go ahead and do that. The way that you access the camera is by using getViewport.getCamera2D. And then we'll be interested in the screen dimensions, especially the screen width. We get this by calling getViewportRect, which is the rectangle that is the exact size of the viewport. So if you remember, we defined the viewport in the project settings. This is what's 100 times 64. So the fact, this prevents us from having to write 100 hard-coded. So you could then change in your project settings the dimensions of the viewport without having to change any line of code. So let's capture the left edge. So the left edge is the camera position. And we'll remove half of the screen width. And we'll do the same for the right edge. We'll just add half of the screen here. Okay, so the left destination, so this is the point that is aligned with the player, but towards the left hand side of the screen, is located at, so it's screen right edge and player.position.y. And the right destination is exactly the opposite with the left, with the, sorry, this is the left edge and this is the right edge. Okay, and so we're interested in knowing which of those two destinations is closest so we can go there. So closest destination and let's compare the length. So this is the distance between the current character, the current enemy character, and that left destination. Otherwise, the closest destination is that right-hand point. Okay, so now let's see, what's the problem here? Screen right edge. Okay, so now the character has 2 points to choose from. It will pick the closest, which will be either towards the right-hand side of the screen or the left-hand side of the screen, but aligned with the Y position of the character. Now we just want to see how close we are to that destination. If we're close enough, we'll just set the velocity to 0. Otherwise, we'll just head towards that point. So if the closest destination minus our position, so we're looking at the distance between us and that closest destination. If it's smaller than 1 pixel, we'll just stop moving. Otherwise, we'll go towards it. And if you remember, going towards it means to have the directional vector, which is the closest destination minus position, normalize it, and multiply this by our speed. Okay, so we will continuously move until we reach that position. And now we'll want to check if we have a knife and if we can actually attack, if enough time has been spent, and if we are colliding with our ray cast, meaning that the player is currently right in front of us. Funk can't throw. All right, so let's go ahead and use this. All right, so if we can throw and we have a knife and our projectile aim is colliding, meaning that we're detecting the player's body to be right aligned with the raycast 2D, then we'll go ahead and move into our throw state. We'll also want to do a couple of additional things. We'll want to make sure that we capture the fact that we threw the knife. And we'll also want to capture that we had a range attack. Okay. And because we changed a lot of the properties, this means that most of the properties here are set back to 0. So let's go ahead and set these. Distance, direction between melee attacks. I believe we had 2000 was a good number and 500 here. And then between range attack, we'll go ahead and set this to maybe 4000 and prep, we'll say 500. Right now, we actually don't have a prep throw, so we're not using this, but I'm assuming that we will use it in just a second. So with that done, let's go over into our world scene, make sure that our enemy has the default properties, and then let's try it out. So the enemy should go to one side of the screen, align with the player, and throw the knife. Okay, it's going to one side of the screen, and get a knife and threw it. It's kind of hard to see because it's really at the edge of the screen, so we probably want to add a little bit of buffer. and maybe we can do that just before finishing the episode. So hopping over into the enemy, scroll over to the top, and here let's add a new const. I don't think we'll need a whole lot, so let's make it 10 to start with as an integer. Okay, and when we calculate our positions here, from the left we want to add it, from the right we want to subtract it. Okay, let's see how this looks. And it goes to the edge, gets a knife, throws it, gets another knife, and throws it. And we can throw it as well. Okay, perfect. So this is great. Now really the only thing that we need to do is to create this new knife scene, which will spawn as soon as we finish the animation here and start flying in the direction that it was thrown, and then cause some damage. So all of this is looking pretty great, and we'll be able to reuse pretty much all of that code for the other collectibles that we have in the game. Well, we're way past our time for this episode. This was definitely a lot to cover between the enemies engaging with the player with both melee and range attacks. It was kind of hard to find a good stopping point. But I know there's a lot of code today, so don't hesitate to reach out using the comment section if you have any issue understanding any of the lines that you've written today. In the next episode, we'll create our projectiles and actually have them do something rather than disappear in thin air. I can't thank you enough for watching this far. I really hope that this tutorial is helpful in your game development journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and once I reach 1,000 subs, I'll have you pick the nature of the next tutorial series. Time to take a quick break, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers!